Devil's Playground. The Ford LTD, a relic of the 70s, rumbled down the desolate highway. Route 666 stretched onward, a black ribbon against the dark expanse of the New Mexico desert. Mark gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles bone white under the dim glow of the dashboard. The air inside the car felt heavy, oppressive. Every mile felt like 10 on this cursed stretch of asphalt. Whispers on the wind. Mark had heard the stories, whispered warnings from locals in the last gas station 100 miles back. Tales of disappearances, of phantom hitchhikers, of a malevolent entity that haunted this road. He scoffed at their superstitions, attributing the stories to overactive imaginations fueled by cheap whiskey and the desert heat. But now, alone in the echoing silence, doubt crept in like the desert chill seeping through the car's old frame. Engine's death rattle. The engine sputtered, a hacking cough that echoed through the stillness. It was a sound that sent shivers down Mark's spine, a mechanical death rattle that signaled impending doom. The once reliable car now seemed like a beast in its final throes, struggling to hold on to life. Mark swore under his breath, the ominous sound amplifying his unease. His heart raced as he glanced around the deserted road, hoping for a sign of life, but finding none. The isolation was palpable, and the darkness seemed to close in around him. The car lurched, power fading before rolling to a stop. It was as if the vehicle had given up, surrendering to the inevitable. Mark's hands tightened on the steering wheel, knuckles white with tension. He tried the ignition again, but the engine only whined in protest, then died. Each turn of the key felt like a plea, a desperate attempt to revive the lifeless machine, but it was no use. The car was dead. Silence descended, heavier than before, broken only by the whisper of the wind whistling through the cracked windows. The night seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting for something to happen. Mark felt a chill run down his spine. Then, he heard it, a low, guttural growl emanating from the darkness beyond the reach of the headlights. It was a sound that didn't belong, a primal noise that sent a wave of fear through him. Mark's eyes widened as he peered into the inky blackness, trying to discern the source of the menacing sound. The growl grew louder, a deep, resonating sound that vibrated in Mark's chest. It was a sound that seemed to come from the very depths of the earth, primal and terrifying. Mark's heart pounded in his ears, each beat echoing the ominous growl. He felt a chill run down his spine, his breath coming in short, shallow gasps. He turned his head slowly towards the source, fear a cold knot in his stomach. His eyes darted around, searching the darkness for any sign of movement. The night seemed to close in around him, the shadows growing thicker and more oppressive. Just beyond the driver's side window, a figure emerged from the darkness. It moved with an eerie grace, its form barely distinguishable from the surrounding shadows. Mark's mind raced, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. It was tall and gaunt, its features obscured by the shadows. The figure seemed almost otherworldly, as if it didn't quite belong in the realm of the living. Mark's pulse quickened, his body frozen in place. 2 points of light pierced the darkness, its eyes glowing with an unnatural intensity. They were like twin beacons of malevolence, cutting through the night and locking onto Mark with a predatory focus. Mark was paralyzed, trapped in the gaze of those hollow white orbs. He felt as if those eyes were boring into his very soul, stripping away his courage and leaving him utterly defenseless. The world around him seemed to fade away, leaving only the terrifying presence of the figure and its haunting, glowing eyes. The figure moved closer, its movements jerky and unnatural, like a stop-motion nightmare. It seemed to glide rather than walk, its feet barely touching the ground. The air grew colder with each step it took, and an eerie silence enveloped the surroundings. The only sound was the rustling of leaves under the figure's feet, a sound that seemed to echo unnaturally in the still night. Mark fumbled for his phone, his hand shaking uncontrollably. His breath came in short, panicked gasps as he tried to steady himself. The screen lit up, casting a pale glow on his terrified face. He could feel his heart pounding in his chest, each beat louder than the last. He knew he had to call for help, but his fingers felt numb and unresponsive. He managed to unlock it, but before he could call for help, a clawed hand slammed against the window. The impact was so sudden and forceful that it left a spiderweb of cracks on the glass. Mark's eyes widened in horror as he stared at the grotesque hand, its nails long and sharp, scratching against the window with a screeching sound. The phone clattered to the floor as Mark recoiled in terror. It bounced once, twice, and then lay still, the screen flickering before going dark. Mark's mind raced, trying to comprehend what was happening. He wanted to run, to escape, but his legs felt like they were made of lead. The figure's eyes burned brighter, and with a deafening crack, the window shattered. Shards of glass flew in all directions, some cutting into Mark's skin. He barely felt the pain, his entire being consumed by the terror of those glowing eyes. They seemed to pierce through him, seeing into his very soul. Mark screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the desert night. It was as if the darkness itself absorbed his cries, leaving nothing but silence in its wake. He felt a cold hand wrap around his throat, cutting off his scream and leaving him gasping for breath. The next morning, the sun rose over a silent Route 666. The sky was painted in hues of orange and pink, a stark contrast to the terror of the previous night. The road was empty, devoid of any signs of life or movement. The Ford LTD was gone, along with any trace of Mark. It was as if he had never been there, the only evidence of his presence wiped clean. The spot where the car had been parked was now just an empty space, a void in the otherwise unbroken expanse of asphalt. Only the shattered glass on the asphalt remained, glinting ominously under the pale light of dawn. Each fragment seemed to tell a story of the horror that had unfolded, a silent testament to the vanishing act that had taken place. The road was quiet, but the memory of the night's events lingered, a haunting reminder of the terror that had come and gone.